The cold air stung her cheeks as Hannah stepped onto the National Archery grounds for the first time. Her hands trembled, not from the breeze, but from the weight of every insult she'd carried here. Her bow wasn't sleek like the others. It was wrapped in tape and memory, handmade by her late father when she was 9. The officials glanced at her registration badge, then at her second-hand equipment, and exchanged a silent smirk. To them, she was just another underdog who'd collapse under the pressure. Hannah walked past teams in matching uniforms with shining bows and personal coaches whispering last-minute strategies. She had no coach, just her. Her mother had pawned her wedding ring to afford the travel costs. Her brother skipped college orientation to drive her here in their rusted pickup truck. And every step she took to the registration desk echoed with the voices of her hometown. "You're not ready. They'll eat you alive. She'll embarrass herself." She remembered walking through the cafeteria at her school last month after placing second in the state qualifiers. The laughter had followed her tray across the room. "Oh, look, it's the poverty princess with her stick and string." Did she tie her arrows with shoelaces again? The tears had threatened to rise, but she had swallowed them whole. She had trained in backyards, open fields, and abandoned barns while they trained in Olympic-grade facilities. But today wasn't about where she came from. It was about where she was going. Behind the stadium bleachers, her mother pressed her hands together tightly, whispering silent prayers with trembling lips. Her brother, Dean, leaned against the truck, his foot tapping nervously. "Come on, kid," he muttered. "Show them what a marsh girl can do." Hannah wasn't supposed to be here. Every judge knew it. Every opponent saw it. And yet here she was, standing straighter than ever, eyes fixed on the center of the target. A commotion broke out near the entrance. Reporters had arrived, buzzing around the reigning champion, Madison Clark, as she exited a black SUV with tinted windows. She wore a silver tracksuit and a cold, polished smile. Madison was everything Hannah wasn't: famous, rich, and born into the elite. "I heard there's a girl from nowhere competing," she told a camera crew with a raised eyebrow. "This isn't a place for hobbyists." But Hannah didn't flinch. She heard it all. And still, she unpacked her battered gear like a soldier ready for war. Her fingers, blistered from years of string burns, moved with care. Her eyes scanned the field, not with fear, but with clarity. For every moment she had been overlooked, for every time she'd eaten stale cereal while others had protein shakes and personal trainers, she remembered. Every scar was a reminder that she had earned her place through pain, not privilege. Back in the waiting area, the competitors were called for final check-in. Hannah's name was last on the list, almost like an afterthought. The clerk looked up at her, brows raised. "You sure you're in the right place?" She nodded, her voice low but steady. "I'm sure." The digital display blinked as her name lit up next to Madison's. Coincidence? Maybe. But for Hannah, it felt like destiny, like fate had drawn a line between the two from the very start. As she walked to her assigned lane, every seat in the arena began to fill. Spectators pointed at the Jumbotron as Madison waved and cameras zoomed in on her flawless stance. Hannah stood a few lanes away, invisible, no lights, no camera, just the overwhelming noise of judgment. A girl dropped her bow next to her, smirking. "Cute setup. Did you build that thing in shop class?" Hannah didn't reply. She adjusted her quiver and stared straight ahead. She wasn't here to banter. She was here to finish what she'd started. 3 years ago, she'd watched this exact tournament on a flickering TV in a hospital room while her father took his last breath. His fingers had curled weakly around hers, voice barely audible. "You've got the eye, baby girl." You just need the chance. The next week, she began saving every dollar from babysitting and lawn work to buy gear. And when that wasn't enough, she built her own. She practiced until her fingers bled, until her bones ached, and when others gave up after a bad round, she stayed until the sun went down. The loudspeaker crackled. Finalists to the field. First round begins in 5 minutes. Hannah inhaled deeply. She glanced toward her brother in the bleachers, who gave her a thumbs up. Her mom pressed a hand to her heart, tears already brimming. Across the field, Madison rolled her shoulders back, confident and carefree, surrounded by assistants and camera crews. Hannah stood alone, but not empty. Her silence was full of fire, and when the buzzer rang, she raised her bow like a blade. Foe. First arrow whistled through the air and landed just shy of the bullseye. Some chuckles followed from the front row. But Hannah didn't let it shake her. She adjusted. She calculated. She remembered every wind pattern she'd studied, every breath control trick her father taught her. With each round, her arrows crept closer to the center. Whispers replaced laughter. Even the announcer's voice changed from dismissive to curious. And newcomer Hannah Marsh with another impressive shot? Behind the scenes, Madison narrowed her eyes. She's lucky. It won't last. But deep inside, something cracked. Because Madison had never had to fight for her position. It was given, handed down like a trophy. But Hannah was building hers arrow by arrow, moment by moment. Her silence wasn't fear. It was focus. And as her scores crept closer to Madison's, the stadium slowly shifted. Eyes that once mocked began to follow her. Voices that once whispered turned into murmurs of awe. Yet inside Hannah, the pressure built like a storm. Every time she closed, her eyes between rounds, she saw her dad's face. She remembered sleeping in cars during small-town competitions. She remembered eating peanut butter sandwiches while others dined on catered meals. She remembered being told to know her place. And now, her place was here, right beside the best, matching their scores step for step. No sponsors, no supporters, just grit, scars, and silent hope. By the final qualifying round, the scores were neck and neck. Madison 93, Hannah 91. One perfect arrow could flip everything. The final round would be televised live. Reporters began asking questions. Who is she? Where did she come from? Is this real? And through it all, Hannah remained wordless, because she knew her story didn't need words. It needed that one shot. The one that would silence the noise, the doubt, the years of ridicule. One shot to turn pain into power. And as she walked to her final lane, she passed by a girl sobbing into her phone. I can't believe I lost to her. Another said, she doesn't even have a brand deal. Who is she? Hannah didn't slow down. Her breath was steady, her eyes calm. This wasn't just a competition, it was her reckoning. She knocked the arrow, took one last breath, and drew the string back with every ounce of strength left in her soul. And just before she let go, she whispered under her breath, "This one's for you, Dad." The arrow struck the target dead center. The crowd gasped as the sound echoed through the stadium like a gunshot. Hannah stood frozen for a split second, unable to believe it herself. A perfect 10. But before the cheer could even fully rise from the crowd, a hush fell over the field. Something was wrong. One of the officials leaned into a microphone, murmuring urgently. Two more gathered at the target. Whispers began swirling through the audience. A judge gestured toward Hannah's lane. Competitor 47, please step aside. She blinked, confused. Her fingers twitched by her side. Her heart pounded. What now? A man in a navy blazer approached with a clipboard in hand. There's a question about your equipment. Her stomach dropped. Not now. Please, not now. Can you step over here for a minute? He added. Hannah looked up into the bleachers. Her mom was standing now. Dean was already halfway down the steps, face full of concern. They led her to a side area behind a curtained partition. Her bow lay on a table under harsh lights. A magnifier was aimed at it. An official tapped at the limbs with a measuring tool. There's a report of unregistered customization. Hannah's voice shook. This bow has passed every qualifier test. I've competed with it for 3 years. A younger judge glanced at the records. There's no violation here, but the man in charge wasn't listening. We'll need to delay scoring until this is clarified. Meanwhile, the other finalists continued their shots. Madison, watching from across the field, gave a crooked grin. Her coach leaned in and whispered something. She laughed softly, tilting her chin. The cameras stayed locked on her. Back behind the curtain, Hannah stood stiff as the officials inspected her bow for the 3rd time. There's nothing wrong, she repeated. You're stalling my round. Her voice grew firmer. Is there a complaint on record? A judge hesitated. Then another muttered, There was an anonymous tip. Her eyes narrowed. Anonymous? That was the moment she knew this wasn't about her bow. This was about making sure she didn't finish. Someone wanted her out. Someone powerful. She thought of Madison, of her money, of her influence. Of course it's her. Hannah's pulse thundered in her ears, but she couldn't let them see her crack. In the stands, murmurs turned into speculation. The announcer's voice faltered. It seems a technical inspection is underway. Her brother stormed down to the edge of the competitors' area. What's going on? She earned that shot. A guard held him back, but Hannah gave him a look. I've got this. Then a quiet voice spoke. The bow is cleared. She can return. But the damage had been done. 15 precious minutes lost. The crowd now shifted uncomfortably. The spell was broken. Reporters started typing scandal headlines before the results were even announced. But Hannah returned to the field in silence, shoulders square, head high. Madison approached her lane with mock concern. Tough break. You should make sure your gear's legal next time. Hannah didn't flinch. She simply whispered, You're scared. And for a flicker of a moment, Madison's smirk faded. The final results were just minutes away. But as the announcer took to the stage, the suspense in the air was thick enough to cut. The scoreboard glitched, then blinked. Due to unexpected delays, the final rankings will be announced manually. The arena lights dimmed. Spotlights turned to the stage. People leaned forward in their seats. Parents held their breath. The atmosphere was electric. Hannah clutched her calloused hands. Together. Then a hush fell as the judge stepped forward. In 3rd place, Ariana Voss. Applause. In 2nd place, Madison Clark. A stunned gasp. Cameras flashed. Madison blinked in disbelief. 2nd, and in 1st place, with a perfect final shot and consistent high scores throughout the round, the silence was deafening. Hannah Marsh. For a moment, the world went still. Then, chaos. Reporters swarmed. Flashbulbs exploded. Madison's coach yelled into a phone. Hannah stood like a statue, stunned, her breath frozen in her chest. Her name. First. Her shot had counted. But even in victory, a shadow lingered. Because the anonymous sabotage attempt wasn't just petty, it was dangerous, and someone still wanted her gone. The spotlight felt heavier than it should have. As Hannah stood there, hands trembling slightly, she glanced out across the field. The cheers were deafening, the cameras clicking non-stop. But there was a small part of her, a silent corner of her heart, that was still wrestling with what had just unfolded. She had won, yes, but the weight of what had almost been stolen from her was too much to ignore. As the last applause reverberated around the stadium, she let her gaze slip toward the stands. Her mother, worn from years of hard work, stood in the back row, her weathered face bright with pride. She had never been one to show emotion publicly, but today was different. Today she had brought Hannah to this moment, not as a coach, but as a mother who had fought tooth and nail to give her daughter this chance. It wasn't lost on Hannah that every dollar spent on gear, every late night spent practicing in their modest living room, had come from the sacrifices her mother made. But it wasn't just her mother that she thought of when the emotions flooded her chest. It was the weight of every person who had ever doubted her, every voice that had whispered, "She doesn't belong here." Growing up in a small town, Hannah had often been the underdog, the quiet girl who sat in the back of class, who lived in a small, modest home that never quite fit in with the glitzier parts of town. The kids at school teased her for being a dreamer, for aspiring to be someone who could never possibly succeed. When she first picked up archery, she was laughed at. "You?" they had sneered. "What's a girl like you doing with a bow and arrow? Stick to something else." Those words burned, but they didn't break her. She had learned early on to take the harshness of the world and turn it into fuel. She had spent years practicing while the world told her to quit. When her teammates were out partying, she was in the woods, training. When they mocked her for missing the target, she simply took another shot. Every rejection, every taunt, every moment of doubt had become part of her fire. And yet, standing there now with the medal around her neck, she felt a strange emptiness. She had achieved what everyone had said was impossible. But in the deepest corners of her heart, she was still that girl who was told she would never make it. And as much as she wanted to savor the victory, a small part of her still felt like an imposter. As she turned to face the crowd, her thoughts flickered back to the moments before she stepped onto the field. When she had heard the whispers, the doubts, the snide remarks in the corners of the locker room, people had spoken about her as if she were a mere placeholder, a girl in the competition who didn't stand a chance. It had been obvious. Even before she had picked up her bow, the others had assumed she wouldn't even make it past the first round. She wasn't one of them, after all. But the truth was, Hannah didn't belong in that world of privilege and power. She belonged in a world where success was earned, where the only thing that mattered was skill, grit, and heart. And despite the obstacles stacked against her, she had made it to the very top. She didn't just win the competition, she proved something more significant. The heart of an underdog, fighting against a system that had already written her off. Hannah's innocence wasn't just about her naivety about the competition or the game. It was her purity of spirit, her belief in fairness, in doing what was right. It was her refusal to bow to the pressures of the high-status world she had entered. The more Hannah moved through the archery circuit, the more she realized the lengths others would go to for the sake of status and success. Her innocence lay in the fact that she didn't know how to play the game of manipulation. When someone tried to sabotage her, it was done with cold, calculated precision. Yet all she could do was carry on, refusing to believe that the competition was anything more than a contest of skill. But maybe it was more, she thought to herself now, standing victorious. Maybe the world wasn't so kind after all. But no matter what, she had stayed true to herself. When she finally lifted her eyes from the ground, she locked eyes with her mother. There was something so pure in that moment. Her mother had fought so hard, raised her alone after Hannah's father left. Her mother had taught her to persevere through everything, no matter how hard the world made it. And now, in that moment, Hannah knew that every tear, every sacrifice, every late-night discussion had led them both to this point. And now, the world would finally see her. But deep within her heart, she still couldn't shake that feeling of being the outsider. Despite the victory, the whispers still lingered in her mind. The feeling of being unworthy, of being an intruder in a world that had no place for people like her. But the truth was, she had earned every step to get here. Every arrow she had shot, every battle she fought, had led her to this. And now, no one could take it away. With her back straight, shoulders squared, and a calm resolve on her face, she finally allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She wasn't a nobody, not anymore. She was a champion, and that was her truth. The competition was over. The crowd's deafening applause had died down, and the room, once filled with the energy of hundreds of excited voices, was now eerily quiet. For a moment, Hannah stood there, taking it all in, the weight of the gold medal around her neck grounding her in a way she never expected. The cheers and the camera flashes had dulled in her mind. She couldn't feel the excitement of victory. All she could hear was the deafening silence of her own thoughts. She'd won. She had beaten the national champion with one shot. But why did it feel like there was something missing? As she stood there, looking out at the mass of people, her mind wandered back to the hours before the competition. It wasn't just the stakes. That made her nervous. It was the realization that despite everything, she still didn't feel like she belonged. Her journey had been marked by doubts, mockery, and constant struggle. People had never believed in her, not truly. And while they now acknowledged her victory, she couldn't shake the feeling that they only saw the medal around her neck, not the woman who had earned it. Her victory should have been the culmination of all her hard work, the affirmation of everything she had endured, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the mockery. But as she stood there in the aftermath, a pang of discomfort hit her heart. The triumph was hollow. Was that all she was? A title? A number on the scoreboard? Something for people to talk about for a moment and then forget? In that silence, the realization came crashing down on her. She hadn't just been fighting against her competition, her teammates, or the expectations of the world. She had been fighting against herself, against the voices inside her head that told her she wasn't enough, that she didn't belong, that she could never be more than what others had said she would be. But now, with the eyes of the world on her, the truth began to settle. It wasn't about the victory itself. It wasn't about proving people wrong or earning a title. It was about what she had learned along the way. It was about how far she had come, how much she had grown, not just as an athlete, but as a person. She had spent so long trying to prove herself to others, trying to silence the doubts that had plagued her since childhood. The whispers of, "You don't belong here," had been louder than any applause she had ever received. She had fought for validation from those who never really mattered, and in the process, she had forgotten the most important thing. She had always been enough. It was in that moment, standing with the medal around her neck, that Hannah truly understood. The will to win, the desire to prove herself, it wasn't about the world's perception of her. It wasn't about the applause or the praise or the fame. It was about her belief in herself, about discovering her worth not because of what others said, but because of what she had realized on her own. Hannah had always known how to shoot a bow and arrow. She had known the technicalities of the sport, the muscle memory, the precision. But this new understanding, the one that settled deep in her chest, was far more profound. It was about seeing herself for who she truly was. Not the girl who had been ignored, pushed aside, and labeled as less than, but the person who had overcome, who had pushed past every obstacle with grace, who had given everything she had, not to win the medal, but to prove to herself that she could. She felt a subtle shift within herself. It wasn't a dramatic, earth-shattering moment. It was quiet, almost humbling, but it was enough to make her breathe deeper, to release the weight that had burdened her for so long. She wasn't defined by her struggles, by the people who had doubted her, by the world's expectations. She was defined by her perseverance, her grit, and the quiet strength that had carried her through it all. Her heart softened as she looked at the people who had always stood by her. Her mother's face beamed with pride. Her coach's smile was one of knowing and encouragement. But most importantly, she saw herself now in a way she never had before. A new understanding blossomed within her. Winning wasn't about beating someone else. It was about overcoming the limitations that had been placed on her and those that she had placed on herself. The victory no longer felt hollow. It wasn't the gold medal that mattered. It was the journey, the growth, the awakening that had taken place inside of her. She no longer needed to prove herself to anyone else. She had already done that, not by winning, but by discovering who she truly was. As the final applause faded into the background, a sense of peace washed over her. She was no longer that scared, uncertain girl who had picked up a bow and arrow all those years ago. She was someone new, someone who had seen her own strength, who had learned to trust herself, and who now stood on the other side of fear and doubt. In that quiet moment, Hannah understood what real victory was. It wasn't just the shot that hit the target. It was the realization that she was enough, no matter what the world had said. And for the first time in her life, she could stand tall, knowing that this victory was hers and hers alone. The room fell into a stunned silence as the final arrow sailed through the air. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as it soared toward the bullseye. Hannah stood frozen in place, her body trembling with exhaustion, her heart racing with anticipation. The sound of her own breath was the only thing she could hear as the arrow spun through the air, an unspoken promise hanging in the balance. Seconds later, the arrow hit its mark, right in the center of the bullseye. The crowd erupted into a roar of disbelief, but Hannah's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She had done it. She had beaten the national champion with a single shot, something that seemed impossible, even in her wildest dreams. The weight of the moment didn't sink in immediately, though. The disbelief gripped her tighter than the adrenaline. Her coach's arms were suddenly around her, pulling her into a tight embrace. But it wasn't until she looked into the faces of the people in the crowd that her emotions truly hit her. Her mother, standing at the edge of the arena, had tears streaming down her face. Her teammates, those who had once doubted her, whispered behind her back, were now applauding, their faces filled with admiration and respect. But it was her coach's eyes that truly spoke to her. His look wasn't just one of pride, it was one of recognition. He knew what this moment meant. He knew the battle she had fought, not just in the competition, but within herself. For so long, she had been the underdog, the one everyone assumed would fail. She had been the girl who didn't belong, who wasn't good enough. And yet, here she was, standing at the pinnacle, surrounded by applause. But what really hit her was the realization that she had finally proven something to herself. The praise of the crowd, the accolades that would follow, none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that she had believed in herself when no one else did. And in doing so, she had silenced the voices that told her she wasn't enough. Hannah's eyes welled up with tears, but she couldn't let them fall, not yet. The weight of the victory settled on her chest, and with it came the rawness of everything she had overcome. The late nights, the hours of practice, the rejection, the doubt, all of it had culminated in this single perfect moment. She wasn't just a victor in the competition. She was a victor over her own fears, her own insecurities. And in that moment, the crowd's cheer faded into the background. She could only hear the steady thud of her heart as she glanced at the medal hanging from her neck, the tangible reminder of how far she had come. For so long, that medal had represented a distant dream, a symbol of everything she was not. But now, it felt different. It didn't define her. She defined it. But it was the look on her mother's face that truly shattered her composure. Mom had never doubted her, had always been her rock. But Hannah knew that for her mother, this victory was everything. The sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the support through every failure, it had all led to this moment, where her daughter stood not as a girl who had failed, but as someone who had triumphed. The tears finally came, cascading down her face. She wasn't crying because she had won, but because in that moment she had found the one thing she had been searching for her entire life: validation. Not from the world, not from her coach, not from the applause, but from herself. She had proven to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. The realization was overwhelming. She wasn't just the girl who had beaten the national champion. She was the girl who had fought through every obstacle, every whisper of doubt, and had come out the other side stronger, more determined. The crowd's cheers were still ringing in her ears, but they felt distant now. She was no longer the underdog. She was the champion of her own journey. As she raised her arms in victory, she realized that the true reward wasn't the applause or the gold medal around her neck. The true reward was the woman standing before her, a woman who had come to terms with her worth, who had embraced her potential, and who had finally learned to believe in herself. That was the victory that truly mattered. And as she looked out at the faces in the crowd, the faces that once doubted her, that once whispered that she didn't belong, she couldn't help but smile. This was her moment, her victory, her story, and it was one that no one could take away from her. Hannah had finally arrived, not just as an athlete, but as a woman who had earned her place in the world, not through anyone's approval, but through her own unwavering belief in herself. And as the cheers continued, she stood tall, knowing that the journey had only just begun. The arena buzzed with excitement as Hannah's name was called, the spotlight shining brightly on her as she walked to the center of the field. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, eagerly awaiting the final round. All eyes were on her, the girl who had defied the odds. The national champion was the clear favorite, his perfect record preceding him, and everyone assumed it would be another flawless victory. But Hannah wasn't here for the title. Not anymore. As she prepared herself mentally for her turn, her mind replayed everything that had brought her to this moment. The grueling practices, the sacrifice, the years of being doubted and underestimated. And yet even now, she felt an unfamiliar weight on her shoulders. This wasn't just about winning. This wasn't just about beating the champion. It was about proving to herself that she was enough. The tension was palpable as the announcer declared the national champion's turn. The man was a legend in the sport, his every move a calculated display of precision. The crowd erupted in applause as he released his shot, hitting the bullseye perfectly. It was the kind of performance that left everyone breathless. But as he stepped away from the target, the unexpected twist came. As the champion prepared to congratulate Hannah on a well-fought competition, something unusual happened. He turned to her with a strange look in his eyes. There was something in his gaze, something that seemed out of place. He leaned in and, in a voice just loud enough for her to hear, he said, I hope you know what this is about. You don't belong here. Hannah froze, her heart sinking as a wave of disbelief washed over her. The words didn't make sense. He had always been gracious, always the epitome of sportsmanship. But this was different. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was personal. The crowd seemed to quiet as the whispers began. What had he said? Was there something more behind this competition than anyone realized? For a moment, she felt like the floor was shifting beneath her feet, her body growing heavy with confusion. Why would he say that now? What did he mean? She had trained for years for this, sacrificed everything to be here, and now, just moments before the most important match of her life, he was planting seeds of doubt. The champion's words echoed in her mind, and she had to fight to keep her composure. But in that brief exchange, something inside of her snapped. The victory she had been chasing, the one she had worked so hard for, suddenly seemed irrelevant. The battle wasn't with him. It wasn't with the crowd or the judges. It was with herself. Hannah stepped up to the line, her hands shaking slightly as she drew her bow. But her mind was elsewhere. The words that had been planted in her were now growing like weeds in her mind, twisting her thoughts. Was she truly good enough? Was she truly meant to be here in this moment competing against someone like him? She released her shot, but it wasn't a perfect hit. The arrow veered slightly off-center, landing just outside the bullseye. It wasn't bad by any means, but it wasn't enough to win. Not against the national champion, not against the perfect shot he had made earlier. A gasp rippled through the crowd as the judge approached to announce the winner. Hannah's heart was pounding in her chest. The twist wasn't just in the competition. It was in her own heart, the sudden onslaught of self-doubt, the sudden understanding that maybe, just maybe, the champion was right. But then something even more unexpected happened. The judge, who had been silent for a moment, suddenly raised his hand to signal for an interruption. The crowd fell into a stunned silence. The announcer leaned into the microphone, speaking in a tone that was almost too calm, too measured for the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer began, "we have just received some news. It seems there has been a critical error in the registration process for this competition. After a review of the records, it has come to our attention that the national champion is not the rightful competitor. He has, in fact, been competing under fraudulent circumstances, using illegal training methods to gain an unfair advantage." The revelation hit the crowd like a bombshell. The murmurs quickly turned into gasps of disbelief, and Hannah could feel the blood draining from her face as the truth began to settle in. The national champion, the man she had been competing against, the man who had always been at the top of his game, had been cheating. The perfect shot, the flawless record, it had all been built on a foundation of lies. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part was the discovery that Hannah had been the rightful champion all along. Her impeccable performance, her dedication, her unyielding perseverance, those had been the true qualities of a champion. In the most unexpected of twists, the girl who had once been seen as an outsider, the one who had been doubted and belittled, had already won. Her journey, her struggle, her moments of self-doubt, everything had led to this. She had never needed to prove herself to anyone else. She had only needed to prove it to herself. And now, in the face of betrayal, in the face of all the lies, Hannah realized that the victory she had been searching for had never been about the title or the medal. It had been about discovering her own worth. The twist was not just about winning the competition. It was about the realization that her value had never been determined by anyone else, not by her opponent, not by the world's judgment, but by the strength she had carried within her all along. And as the national champion was disqualified, Hannah stood tall, the applause of the crowd now roaring in her ears. Her emotions were a whirlpool: relief, disbelief, triumph. But most of all, she felt a sense of clarity. She didn't need anyone's validation to prove she was worthy. She had already proved it. Hannah's path to victory was never easy. For years, she had worked relentlessly, often in the shadows, behind the scenes, where no one noticed. While her friends were out enjoying their youth, socializing, and living carefree lives, Hannah was in the gym, practicing hour after hour, pushing her limits. The sacrifices she made were not only physical, but also emotional. She was constantly surrounded by people who doubted her potential, people who mocked her for choosing such an impossible path. Many days, the weight of the world felt too heavy for her, but Hannah bore it all in silence. One key moment of silent sacrifice that shaped Hannah's journey took place when she was just a teenager. She was faced with the choice of taking a part-time job to help support her family, who were going through a tough financial period. It was a job that would provide her with much-needed income, but it would also take away from her training time. Despite the exhaustion, despite the financial strain, she chose to sacrifice her own desires, her dreams of a more comfortable life, and even her social life to put everything into her sport. She stayed up late after work, studying her sport, analyzing the greats, practicing and refining her technique. The people around her never knew the extent of her sacrifice. They saw the finished product, the athlete on the field, but never the person who gave up everything to get there. Another layer of silent sacrifice was the emotional toll it took on her relationship with her family and friends. Hannah's parents, though supportive, were often busy with their own struggles, and it left her to deal with most of the emotional burden alone. There were many nights when Hannah wanted to break down and cry, to share her frustration, to scream about how unfair. It felt that she was always fighting alone, but she never did. She didn't want to burden anyone else with her pain. It was a burden she carried in silence, every day pushing through the exhaustion, the doubts, the loneliness. This sacrifice wasn't seen by many. While others saw her achievements, they didn't know the internal battles she fought every day. There were nights when she lay awake in bed, wondering if it was all worth it. There were moments when she wanted to give up, when she questioned whether she would ever truly be seen for her efforts. But each time, she chose to keep pushing forward, silently sacrificing her own peace of mind for the chance to prove herself. The true test of this silent sacrifice came during the most pivotal moment of the competition, when she faced the national champion. The tension was thick in the air, and as she stepped up to make her shot, the weight of everything she had given up in the pursuit of greatness came crashing down on her. She had carried this silent burden for so long, it felt as though it would break her. But instead of crumbling under the pressure, Hannah drew strength from her sacrifice. The silent sacrifice was no longer just about her past struggles. It was the culmination of everything she had given up, everything she had silently endured, and now, in this moment, it was her strength. It gave her clarity, it gave her focus. And as the bowstring released and the arrow soared through the air, it was the manifestation of her journey, a journey made not with words, but with actions. The most poignant moment of silent sacrifice came after her unexpected victory, when the truth about the national champion's cheating was revealed. The crowd went wild, cheering her on, but in that moment there was no real celebration for Hannah. She had done what she set out to do, but there was no grand display of joy. Instead, there was quiet satisfaction, a deep sense of peace in her heart. She had proven her worth, not to anyone else, but to herself. She knew the cost of her journey, and though the applause rang in her ears, it was the quiet, solitary moments of sacrifice that gave her the strength to stand tall. The applause wasn't for the win. It was for the fight, for the silent battles no one had ever seen, but that she had won all along. In the end, the most important lesson that Hannah learned was that true strength wasn't just about the physical challenges she faced. It wasn't about the competitions she won or the recognition she received. It was about the sacrifices she made in silence, the moments when no one was watching, the quiet resilience she developed as she stood alone. It was these silent sacrifices that had shaped her into the person who could finally stand in the spotlight and accept her victory. Not just as an athlete, but as a person who had learned that true success isn't measured by how loudly others applaud, but by how deeply we understand the worth of our own sacrifices. Hannah stood in the shadows, watching the national champion with a sharp gaze. The gymnasium was filled with people, but in her mind, it was just the two of them. The champion, with his smug smile, didn't know what was coming. He had always been the best, the one everyone feared. But Hannah had something he didn't. She had something far more important than skill. She had determination. She had worked tirelessly, fought against the odds, and sacrificed so much. Her friends, her family, none of them fully understood the extent of her commitment. They didn't see the hours she spent alone, pushing herself beyond her limits, not for fame or fortune, but for respect, for herself. Her eyes narrowed as she saw the champion making his way to the court. He brushed past her, not even sparing a glance. That was the moment. He wouldn't acknowledge her now, but soon he would. The moment the competition began, her heartbeat quickened. Every movement, every step she took felt calculated, like she was walking the line between victory and failure. The eyes of the audience were all on her, some doubtful, some curious, but none of them truly believed she could pull this off. She could hear their whispers, their judgments. "She doesn't belong here," they said. "She's just lucky to be in the same room." But none of that mattered to Hannah. Her mind flashed back to all the training sessions when no one was watching, all the nights when she questioned if it was worth it, the countless hours, the moments of doubt, the pain that had threatened to break her. And yet she stood there, her chest rising with every breath, every inch of her body focused on the goal ahead. She was determined. She would show them. She wasn't here to take part. She was here to win. With every move, every breath, her resolve hardened. She blocked out the noise, the doubts, and the doubts of others. Her focus was laser sharp, her mind crystal clear. The champion smirked, clearly underestimating her, but that only fueled her drive. The arena felt suffocating, the pressure intense. But she didn't flinch. The crowd cheered for their champion, but she had already made her decision. She wasn't just going to beat him. She was going to take everything he had worked for, everything he thought he deserved, and show him that she was the real competitor. As she moved towards the line, her heart pounded with a protective fury. She wasn't just protecting her place in this competition. She was protecting everything that had gotten her to this point. She was protecting her dreams, her years of hard work, and all the silent sacrifices she had made. No one would take that from her. No one would take her moment. And as the shot left her hands, there was no doubt in her mind. This was her time. The world held its breath as the ball soared through the air. Time seemed to stand still, and for a split second, the noise of the crowd faded. It was just her and the shot. When the ball hit its target and the crowd erupted into cheers, Hannah didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had known all along. This wasn't about anyone else. It was about her. It was about proving, once and for all, that she belonged in this moment. The arena buzzed with the aftermath of the match. Hannah stood still, surrounded by the deafening cheers of the crowd, yet her mind was a storm. The national champion had fallen, his face pale and stunned. She had done the impossible. But as the applause echoed in her ears, a sinking feeling settled deep in her chest. Was this victory truly hers? Or was it just the consequence of someone else's loss? The applause grew louder as she was lifted on the shoulders of her teammates. But Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her victory had been hard-won, no doubt, but at what cost? The champion, once full of pride, now stood at the edge of the court, staring down at her in silence. His entire career was crumbling before his eyes, and she couldn't ignore the look of defeat in his eyes. She had watched him rise to the top, admired his skills and dedication. He had been the hero everyone looked up to. And now, here she was, standing on the top of the mountain she had climbed by taking his place. The weight of his loss pressed down on her, and for the first time, Hannah felt the sting of regret. In the silence that followed the chaos of victory, she walked over to the champion, her heart heavy with an emotion she hadn't expected to feel. Regret. She had wanted this, wanted to be the best, to prove herself. But standing there, watching him, she realized the toll it had taken. His face was a mixture of disbelief and hurt, and for a moment, Hannah saw him not as the champion, but as a person who had worked for years to get to this point, only to be swept away in one moment. The weight of his years of sacrifice, his relentless pursuit of greatness, now lay in the balance, lost to a single shot. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, surprised by the words. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. In that gaze, there was no bitterness, no anger. Just a shared understanding of what it meant to sacrifice everything for a dream. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," Hannah continued, her words heavy with sincerity. "You were the one everyone thought would win. I didn't know what it would feel like to take that from you." The champion stood in silence as if processing her words. The crowd had started to thin out, their cheers turning to murmurs. This wasn't the victory Hannah had envisioned. The celebration felt hollow, as though the triumph came at a personal cost she hadn't fully understood until now. The champion finally spoke, his voice soft but strong. "You earned it, Hannah. Don't ever doubt that. But this isn't just a game. It's life. And life doesn't always give you what you want when you want it. It takes everything, and sometimes it leaves you with nothing." His words struck her to the core. She had won. But at what price? He had spent years shaping himself into the champion he was, and now, in the blink of an eye, it was over for him. And all she could do was stand there holding the weight of his loss in her hands. But in that moment, something inside Hannah began to change. The regret she had felt slowly morphed into something else, something far more profound. It was redemption. She had a chance to make this right. She could have walked away, basked in her glory, and left him behind in the dust. But that wasn't the person she wanted to be. She reached out to him, her hand trembling slightly. "I want to help you," she said, the words carrying more weight than she had anticipated. "I want to give you another shot at this. We both deserve that. Let's figure out a way for both of us to move forward from this." His eyes searched hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the tension in his shoulders seemed to relax. He nodded slowly. "I never thought I'd hear those words from you, but maybe we can start over. Together." In that instant, Hannah understood. Victory wasn't just about taking the top spot. It was about lifting others up too. It was about redemption, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever fallen. It was about embracing the fact that the road to greatness wasn't a solitary path. It was about helping others rise from their own struggles, their own defeats. The gymnasium was filled with a thick tension, the kind that makes every second feel like an eternity. Hannah stood at the center of the court, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the crowd's growing murmurs. The national champion stood opposite her, his reputation as unshakable as his composure. He had dominated every game, every tournament, every challenger who had dared to face him. But now it was just her and him. No history, no crowd, no expectations, just the present moment, stretched thin like a wire about to snap. Her body ached, sweat trickled down her brow, and her legs felt as though they might give out beneath her. This was it, the final defining shot. Everything that had led her here felt distant, as if they were memories belonging to someone else. The hours of practice in the dimly lit gym, the sacrifices she had made, the doubt she had faced from everyone, including herself. This one shot was the culmination of everything. The scoreboard glowed above, ticking down the final seconds of the match, the clock winding down toward its inevitable end. The champion was watching her closely now, his face unreadable, his hands balled into fists. He had been in this position countless times before, but this time felt different. This time, his eyes betrayed something. Was it fear? Doubt? He couldn't afford to lose, not after all he had been through, not after all he had fought for. But it wasn't just about the game anymore. As the last few seconds bled away, everything in Hannah's life, everything she had ever fought for, seemed to hang on this one moment. She had always been the underdog, the one people didn't believe in, the one they thought wouldn't make it, the one they thought didn't belong. But here, in this moment, she knew she was more than that. She had always been more. She just had to prove it to herself. Her hand tightened on the ball, and she took one last deep breath. The crowd fell into an almost suffocating silence, as though they too knew that this moment would decide everything. A single, trembling thought ran through her mind. Do I believe in myself? She had spent so much time letting others define her, letting them dictate what she was capable of. But now, it was her turn to define her own fate. The ball left her fingertips, soaring through the air in a perfect arc. It felt like time itself slowed as it sailed toward the basket. And then, in a moment that felt both impossibly slow and shockingly fast, the ball swished through the net. The gym exploded into a roar. For a brief second, everything froze. Her heart, the world, the moment itself. She had done it. She had just beaten the national champion with one shot. It was the impossible dream made real. But even as the noise of the crowd filled the space around her, a single word lingered in her mind. Impossible. It had always felt like that. Like her life was a series of impossible challenges. But standing there now, victorious, with the reality of the situation sinking in, she realized the truth. It had never been impossible. It had only felt that way because she had allowed herself to believe it was. As the champion walked toward her, his face showing signs of respect, perhaps even admiration, she realized something profound. This wasn't just a victory over him. It was a victory over every doubt she had ever faced, over every time someone had told her she wasn't good enough, over every moment when she had nearly given up on herself. The champion's eyes met hers, and for the first time they weren't filled with competition. They were filled with something else, understanding. He had been at the top for so long, but in this moment it was clear to him that true greatness wasn't just about winning. It was about overcoming what felt like the impossible. The crowd erupted again. But Hannah didn't hear them. She didn't need their validation. She didn't need to be anyone's idea of a winner. The only validation she needed was the one she had found within herself. As she turned and raised her arms in the air, the realization hit her all at once. This wasn't just her victory, it was everyone's. It was a triumph for anyone who had ever felt underestimated, who had ever been told they didn't belong. The national champion approached her, offering a hand to shake, and she took it, feeling the weight of the moment settle between them. Neither of them said anything at first, but in the unspoken exchange, Hannah saw it. He didn't resent her. He respected her. In that handshake, there was no rivalry, only the shared recognition of how hard it was to get here and how hard it was to keep fighting. The gym gradually quieted down as the crowd began to disperse, but the feeling of the moment lingered. The air seemed charged, as if something had shifted, not just in the game, but in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. Hannah wasn't just the girl who beat the national champion. She was the girl who had shown everyone, including herself, that anything was possible if you never gave up. The aftermath of the game was a blur, a mixture of cheers, high fives, and handshakes. Yet for Hannah, everything slowed as the weight of what had just transpired settled deep within her. She stood there, surrounded by a sea of people who were now congratulating her, but in her heart, there was a deep, quiet sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. The tension that had once coiled tightly around her chest began to unwind, and she found herself breathing for the first time, deeply and slowly, as if the air itself had changed. The national champion, once the symbol of everything Hannah had strived to become, now seemed distant, not in a way that felt defeating, but in a way that revealed the true nature of her journey. This wasn't just about the game, it wasn't just about beating him, it was about overcoming the self-doubt, the whispers of, "You'll never make it," that had echoed in her mind for years. It was about proving to herself that she wasn't just capable. She was deserving of everything she had fought for. As the crowd began to disperse, the once deafening noise slowly faded away, leaving Hannah in a rare moment of silence. In that silence, clarity washed over her like a wave. This was not the end of her story, but only the beginning. She had spent so much of her life chasing approval from others, seeking validation from people who didn't believe in her, from a world that didn't expect her to win. She had played for their recognition, for their applause. But now, standing in the quiet after the chaos, she realized the one thing that had eluded her until now. She didn't need anyone's approval. The only validation that mattered was her own. The only victory that counted was the one where she conquered the limits she had placed on herself. In the stands, her family watched, their eyes wide with pride. But it wasn't just their pride that filled her heart. It was the realization that she had finally earned her place, not because of the cheers or the championship title, but because she had learned to believe in herself when no one else did. She had fought against the voices of doubt, against the walls of expectation that had tried to keep her in a box, and she had broken free. In the end, it wasn't the trophy that mattered. It was the fact that she had the courage to keep moving forward when the world seemed determined to hold her back. And as the evening sky turned from orange to a deep purple, Hannah looked around at the people who had once doubted her. The same people who now watched her with admiration. A sense of calm washed over her. This moment was hers, but it was not just for her. It was for everyone who had ever felt like an outsider, like they didn't belong. It was for anyone who had ever been told they couldn't make it. Hannah had made it, not by fitting into someone else's idea of success, but by embracing her own unique path. As she walked away from the court, her steps were light, not because the burden of the game had been lifted, but because she now understood something far more valuable. The path ahead of her was wide open. It was no longer about proving herself to anyone else. It was about proving to herself every single day that she was worthy of every success, every opportunity, and every challenge that came her way. She was not just the girl who beat the national champion with one shot. She was the girl who had fought for her place, the girl who had built herself up from nothing and had finally seen her own worth. And as the cool evening air brushed against her skin, Hannah knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The world was hers to conquer, not because she had defeated a champion, but because she had found the champion inside herself. With every step she took, she moved forward, not just with the hope of what was to come, but with the certainty that whatever she faced, she could handle it. And with that certainty, the future felt wide open, full of endless possibilities. As the night fell and the gym doors closed behind her, the faint echo of her victory lingered, not in the sound of the crowd, but in the quiet confidence she carried within herself. It wasn't just a moment of triumph. It was a lifelong awakening. And that awakening was her greatest victory of all.